Hey gang, thanks for checking out Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a story that you would like to share and have me broadcast, please send it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy these 3 short stories about the terrors found on Craigslist. And stick around for a special Q&A portion at the end of the stories. I tried to buy a car on Craigslist. I was looking for a car to buy for my son for his 18th birthday. I was searching all the car websites, and they were all overpriced as I expected. Craigslist was the only place I found an actual deal. I found a car in good condition for only $500, and this seemed like a steal. The seller lived about 10 miles away, and I figured that's not a bad drive for looking for a car. I gave him a call to set up a time to come check it out, and he sounded normal on the phone and said that there would be no problems with the car. He introduced himself as Bob. I pulled up some dirt roads of Bob's property, and I was about 15 minutes early. It was a tiny little house with a decent-sized property, only because it was a bit far from the nearest neighbor. The garage was open, so I walked over to see if anyone was inside, but except for an unusual amount of car parts, it was empty. The car was nowhere in sight, and the only car in sight was an old pickup truck. I went over to the front door to check the house numbers, and it was the right address. The doorbell button was missing, so I knocked on the door. I knocked for about 5 minutes before deciding to give the guy a call, so I dialed his number, and I heard the sound of a phone ringing inside the house. I was extremely confused at this point. I knew I was at the right house. I didn't understand why, if he was home, he wasn't answering. I decided I had to take a peek through one of the windows to see if anybody was inside. Peering through the glass, I couldn't see shit because it was pretty dark inside the house. I saw a very old-fashioned dining room set, but across from that I saw somebody standing at the back door of the house, just staring outside. I figured that it must be Bob, and I knocked on the window, but he didn't even move. There was no gate or anything to the backyard, it was just wide open, so I simply walked around the house to the backyard. I didn't understand how he couldn't hear me, and when I got to the back door, I made a shocking revelation. The figure standing by the door was a mannequin. I went back the way I came and went back to my car, and I looked out my window one last time before driving off. There were blinds in the window, but I could see 2 of the blinds bent open. Someone was at that window watching me. You could probably guess I had the pedal to the floor the whole way home. That whole situation was so bizarre. All the car parts, the fact that there was no car, a mannequin, and the fact that there was no car there leads me to believe that whoever that man wasn't planning on selling me anything. And it also leads me to the disturbing thought that I was very close to becoming another mannequin staring out his back door. I rented on Craigslist. Submitted by Carmen. So, I had graduated from college and moved home for a year, and decided I couldn't live with my parents and 2 younger brothers anymore. Living on your own at school will do that. For the record, I'm a female, and I was 22 at the time this happened around 2002. At first, I thought I was going to split things with a friend, but she decided to stay home and save money as she was planning on moving to Atlanta. And we lived in New Jersey. I checked out all these high-end places that required crazy deposits, and a lot of others in the local papers and websites, but they didn't meet my criteria. I wanted to bring my cat. It was frustrating. Every time I did find a cool place, it was either taken or wouldn't be available for like 6 months. I mean, I'm sure there's a reason, but I never understood why the hell anyone would advertise for something that wouldn't be ready for 6 months. As a last resort, I checked out Craigslist. I found a couple in a town over from my own, and they were also closer to the restaurant I worked at. The first one was a bust, it was a total dump. But the one that had pictures on Craigslist lived up to what was claimed. It was a 2-bedroom lower, with off-street parking, 2 spaces allotted to me, with a little yard out back, and cats were welcome. It was a bit over my price range, but otherwise I thought it was great. I was excited to have a second room I could dedicate to my painting and writing. I still do both as a freelancer. I wouldn't have to worry about getting my materials all over my room or the living or dining area. And with that second room, if I got into trouble, I could always get a roommate later. I was so excited to check it out in person with my dad. We got in touch with the owner, and it was available, so we made arrangements to go look at it that night. We got there, and it was a very well-kept place on a nice street with what looked like a lot of family dwellings and huge older homes that had been converted into doubles and such. My soon-to-be landlord was named Ryan, and he lived on the upper residence. He was in his 30s and was very pleasant. He showed us the place, and it was awesome. Newly renovated with new appliances and fixtures, new hardwood floors. Like I said, it was awesome. I lived in other places since this, and a lot of renovated places are just joints with new carpet and paint, and I'm sure a lot of people know what I'm talking about. That new paint is usually caked over dozens of other layers of paint, windows that barely open or close, that sort of thing. My dad was trying to keep me calm, but he knew I wanted it, and I certainly did. Ryan told us to take our time and think about it. I was the only one who had been out to see it so far. Later, I would find out this was a lie. We went back to the car, and I told my dad that this was the place. He was already iffy on me being on my own, but he also knew that I was responsible. I reminded him a lot of the places around here didn't have a landlord on the premises. In this area, a lot of the owners live out of state. And it wasn't far from home, and I could even walk to work. So he called my mom, and she said I was too old to be being told what to do, and he agreed. 2 weeks later, I moved in. About a week after I moved in, I had some friends over for a small party, and we were in and out of the apartment and out on the back deck. We were having a blast until my friend Jeff looked up at the awning over the deck and asked what the camera was for. I hadn't noticed it before. It was one of those bubble-looking security camera type things up in the corner. Just then Ryan came up the back steps to see how I was getting along, and I'm sure to score a couple of free beers. I asked him about it, and he said that there were actually 2 cameras. One was in the front and one was in the back. It was just a security measure that he had put in. I thought that made sense, and he hung out for a while and talked to my friends and was really cool. Weeks went by and I was loving life in my place. My job was going well, my painting was going well, and I was lining up interviews as I was trying to get a job in social work at some of the local schools. I had met a guy through my best friend Lisa, and we hit it off and began spending a lot of time together. His name was Patrick, and my parents liked him right away too. He was the first non-Latino guy I had ever dated, so that was quite a feat. One night I came home from the restaurant and met Patrick and his friend David, who was my best friend Lisa's boyfriend. They were hanging outside my place, and I asked what was up, and they said we should go inside. Lisa immediately poured us some wine, and the guys grabbed beers, and we all sat down in the living room. David looked at me and said, I have something to tell you, and it's really embarrassing, and that's why I asked Lisa and Pat to be here too. He unfolded some pieces of paper he had in his pocket, and there were pictures on them. Pictures of me. Lots of them. Me in the bathroom, me in bed with Patrick, me painting naked in my art room. Don't judge me. My jaw dropped open, and I asked where the hell he got those. He was ashamed, but he came across them on a porno website. And Lisa shook her head, and he gave her the, God, I'm really sorry look. But I didn't give a shit about that. My naked body was on the internet for anyone to see. I first looked at Patrick, but there was no way it could have been him. I was shaking, and Lisa was holding one hand, and Patrick put his arm around me on the other side. I remember crying, and Patrick saying David had called him right away when he saw them, and they both went to the site looking for any clues as to how they got them. But the guy who ran it never replied to them, and there were no names or anything, just pictures of all kinds of women in their homes or wherever. After I stopped crying, I drank some wine, and my Latino blood kicked in, and I got pissed. I was raving at this point, screaming about who was doing this, and then Patrick said, wait, notice how none of these are coming from a door or a window? But Lisa said, wait a minute. Jeff. I looked at her and said, no way, it was Jeff. And she said, no. Remember when Jeff noticed the camera outside? I nodded. What if there's more? My face turned white, and Patrick jumped up and ran to my bedroom with the sheet with the pictures of he and I in bed. We followed him and he began trying to figure out the angle of the shot and looked up at the smoke detector in the hallway. There was a little hole in the side of it. He reached up and pulled the unit down, and there were wires that went up into the ceiling. He put it back and then checked the other one in my art room. Same thing. He ran to the one in my living room dining room area. Another one. Someone had set the entire place up to take pictures of whoever was in the house. I started crying again and yelling and just going berserk. And then it dawned on everyone. Ryan the landlord. He was the only one who could have done this. And just then there was a knock at the door. I grabbed the photos and put them in a pocket, and Lisa opened the door up, and in trooped 3 of our friends, Jeff, Scott, and Ryan. Another one, not the landlord. They were laughing and had brought beer and snacks, but stopped when they saw us looking the way we did. Scott asked what was up, and I looked down, and then back up at Patrick and David. I nodded, and they told them what was up. Jeff said we should put tape or something over them right away, and Patrick did that as we all stood talking. What the fuck was I going to do? Ryan suggested we all calm down and have a beer, and we could brainstorm what we should do next. He then mentioned he thought it was odd that I got the apartment as fast as I did. I asked why, and he said that not only him, but like 3 other guys he knew inquired about the place, and none were offered a lease. I was getting madder and madder when there was another knock at the door. It was Ryan, the landlord. "Oh, I didn't know you had people over. I'll come back tomorrow," he said. I just stared at him, and Lisa asked what he wanted. He smiled charmingly. "Routine maintenance stuff. I need to check the fire extinguisher in the kitchen and test the smoke detectors. Just legal things. No big deal. I'll stop by tomorrow." And then he left. I looked at everyone, and Patrick said, "Call the cops right now." We did, and about a half hour later, 2 showed up, and we told them what we thought was going on, and as embarrassing as it was, I showed them the pictures. Then they took a look at one of the smoke detectors and said that it was likely they had cameras in them. They said they would get a warrant to search the whole building, but it would take a little bit. I asked Patrick to take me to my parents, and he did. Through raging tears, I had to tell my parents what was going on, and my dad went crazy. My mom had to calm him down. He was talking about beating the shit out of Ryan, and what he kept saying was neighborhood justice. Early the next morning, the police met us back at my place, and we let them in. Sure enough, all of the detectors did have cameras that were wired upstairs to Ryan's upper. He wasn't home, so the cops forced entry and found a room that had been hastily cleaned out. There were shelves and racks of cords, and you could tell there were computers or something that once sat on them. That scumbag must have seen the cops show up last night, and then cleared everything out. I grabbed some things and went home as the police said I should, and they would get in touch with us as soon as they knew more. They caught up with Ryan the next day as he was trying to get back into his place after cutting through backyards. He left his Jeep parked on another street. He was arrested and they found all kinds of equipment in the back of his car that he'd used to spy on me and the neighbors. It turns out he had some kind of a deal with a local porn shop and was getting paid to get pictures of young Latina women. And this guy would then sell them to people on the internet. The thing that made me even sicker is when the district attorney was talking to me and my parents about things, she said it was likely that my pictures were elsewhere on the internet, and there wasn't a lot that we were going to be able to do about it. We were all so sick, but none more than me. Anyway, Ryan did get a jail sentence, but it was only for 4 years and he got out before serving the whole time. We filed a civil suit against him, and we did get some money, but by then he and his lawyer had messed around with the court system so much it was almost not worth it. Patrick and I split up, and I actually started dating the other Ryan, and we've been married since 2010. A long story, I know, but word to the wise. Be careful who you do anything with that you find on Craigslist. I'm sure more people than not never have any issues, but there's always a scumbag out there waiting to take advantage of you. Oh, and David? He married Lisa, but she to this day hasn't let him live down his cruising the net for porn. And I still thank him every time I see him, because who knows how long that could have gone on if he hadn't seen those pictures. House hunting on Craigslist. Last year I was looking for a house. I looked and called person after person. I finally looked on Craigslist and found a place that was about 2 miles from where I lived. They said large dogs were okay. So I called the number and left my name and number, and asked them to call me back. About 2 minutes after I left the voicemail, I got a call from a lady saying that she got my message about the house. She gave me the address again, her name, and her friend's name, Chris. The lady told me that Chris would meet me there and let me look around. It was about 7:15 at night and nearly dark outside. But the lady said, "Is there any way you can come over now to look at the house? My friend is leaving town tonight and won't be back to show the house for a few weeks." I thought that was strange, but I wanted the house, so I said I'd be there in 20 minutes. So I called my mom up and told her the phone numbers, name and address of the house I was going to look at, and I also told her that I was about 5 minutes away, and that if I didn't call back in 20 minutes to call the cops. I told her that if I got killed, they were the ones who did it. Yeah, I know, a little overdramatic. I pulled up to the house and saw a guy by the door. He was about 40, creepy and weird, and looked like a tweaker. He unlocked the door and let me in and showed me the place. The place was a piece of shit. Handprints on the walls, dirty carpet, no fridge, no washer, foot-high grass in the backyard, and it smelled like mold in the place. I mean, it was bad. Well, he handed me a lease and said it was $900 a month for this rundown 2-bedroom house. He also said it was $100 for every day I was late on the rent. I told him no and half ran out of the house. 2 weeks later, I was driving around the same neighborhood and saw that for-rent house was completely gutted and had a bunch of people working in the yard. I walked up and asked to speak to Chris, the owner, and the worker I talked to told me that the owner was out back. Well, I met the owner, who was not the guy Chris, and he told me he never put the house on Craigslist and that he had been out of town. He said that the guy must have been trying to get money off of me. I told him that the guy even had a key, and he said foolishly he left a key in the mailbox, so that's probably where he got it from. I'm glad I got out of there, because at worst, I would have lost some money, but when I look back at it, I could have lost a lot more. Hey gang, sorry this episode is so short, but there's a pretty good reason for it. I had volume 17 pretty much done, just not produced fully, and in between then and this, my town suffered one of the biggest flash floods, actually the biggest flash flood since the 1930s, and my house happened to take a pretty decent hit, and my basement was flooded, and I've been dealing with that, and also trying to get my other show off the ground, which I had to cancel because of that flood, so I figured I would just do a couple of these stories because someone had sent me in a story, and I thought, well, I'll check around for some Craigslist stories, and I couldn't find many that hadn't already been done, so rather than bore you with repeats, I found a couple that I thought were cool, and then I thought, hey, why don't I get to that Q&A that I was talking about? And of course, anytime that you do have a question or a story, please send it to me, unclejoshtruescarystories @gmail.com. So I'm going to get to some of this Q&A. I think there's like 5 or 6 questions that I thought were pretty cool, and I'll put that on here, and then we will have volume 18 coming back at you next week. So, again, I apologize, but hey, life is life, shit is shit, it's what happens, and it is what it is. So, let's get into some of these questions. I thought some of these were pretty cool. Clemens22145 wrote in and said, what is your favorite scary movie and or book? That's a cool question. Scary movie is really tough. So is books, actually. It depends on what genre of scary movie you're talking about. And I guess if I had to pick, let's say thriller, probably Manhunter. It's a Michael Mann movie from, I believe, 1986. I saw it when I was a kid. It scared the shit out of me. It's the original. Silence of the Lambs was the second one. Manhunter was actually the prequel to that, and I think they remade it as Red Dragon. I've never seen Red Dragon. Brian Cox as Hannibal Lecter in Manhunter is one of the most terrifying things I've ever seen in my entire life. I loved Anthony Hopkins but Anthony Hopkins was so overboard, and I hate to use the word trying too hard, but if you've never seen Manhunter, I suggest you check it out. There's a couple of clips on YouTube, and Brian Cox is just... There's the over-the-top guy, and then there's the guy that you could say, holy shit, this guy really is crazy. So check out Manhunter. Right behind that, as far as thrillers, I would say Seven. I love the movie Seven. That's pretty terrifying. And I guess in that genre, I love the ones that are closer to reality. Straight horror, sci-fi stuff. I love a couple of flicks. I mean, the original Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead, I like those. I'm trying to think of the one with Lawrence Fishburne. Event Horizon. I thought Event Horizon was pretty cool. That was more of a sci-fi side. But so those are those. Books, I would say... I'm trying to think what book would really affected me, and I thought, holy God, American Psycho, only because, again, it was closer to reality, and it was about a guy who's mentally ill, and you can disagree with me about that, and we can have a debate sometime. That bothered me a lot, and I think a lot of the stories in Stephen King's Night Shift. I love The Mist. I hated the movie, but I loved the novella The Mist. I thought that was pretty good. I'm trying to think. Uncle Otto's Truck is in that. That was pretty creepy. So that would be the book. So Clemens 22-145. Thanks for asking that question. Let's see here. Franny and Tempe. Is that picture of the bearded man really you? No, actually, that is not me. I am not that old, which is actually, there's a follow-up question to that. That is not me. I have no idea who that is. That image came from Morgue File, and I just thought it was cool. He kind of looked like an Uncle Josh, so that's why I picked that. Following up with that, I'm going to skip down. Elaine D asks, how old are you? None of your business. That's how old I am. No, I will tell you this. I'm in my 40s, Elaine, and I appreciate you writing in. And you too, Franny and Tempe, I hope you keep listening. Let's see here. Eric with an H asks, do you believe all the stories you share? I believe that everyone who sends in a story believes that they saw what they saw or experienced what they experienced. And that's really as deep as I can get into that. I don't know. I'm no expert. I talk to people about this sort of thing on my radio show, The Edge of the Unknown, all the time. Can I believe 100% everything that they say happened? No. People comment all the time on YouTube. They're like, this is great, but this isn't real. This isn't true. And everybody has that privilege. And I guess I have to leave that in your hands. Do you believe all of the stories that I share? Eric with an H. Thanks for asking that question. Pub Life 49. Can you do more real life stuff and cut back on ghosts and shit like that? I like the mix, honestly, and I think most people like the mix. I did see a comment, and I don't know if this was you, Pub Life, so I apologize, but someone said, thanks for the timestamps. I like to skip past the ghost stuff. I like kind of mixing it up. I like some of the paranormal and some of the real life stuff. I think it makes for a more entertaining hour of listening, or 40 minutes or whatever it is that I've done. So I can't say that I'm going to cut back on the real life or do more real life stuff and cut back on ghosts and shit like that. I think I'm just going to keep it the way that it is. And I hope that doesn't piss you off too much. Let's see. Can you fix the music? It's too loud sometimes. That comes from High Times in Hanover. You know what? I've thought about this, and I know some of the early episodes, it was a terrible mix. I think I was in a hurry to get them out on the network that I was on, and I wasn't paying attention to the quality. I've thought about going back and changing that, but the thing is if I rip it down from YouTube, I'm going to lose all of that, all that traction that I got with people, and I don't want to do that. So perhaps what I can do is remix them and maybe take 2 or 3 episodes at a time and just do kind of a best of. High Times in Hanover. Let me know if you would dig that, and anybody else who thinks that's a good idea. I could always do that. I could always re-record or just remix what I've got with less music and then just make that kind of best of. I think that's probably the smartest way to do it. So appreciate that question. And let's see what else we got here. JJ Says wrote in, actually in the comments, what's the scariest thing that's happened to you? Wow. I've had a lot of weird things happen to me. What's the scariest thing? I think, and when I was reading this over the weekend with this flood, and you guys have to understand, this flood was unbelievable. It's a creek that ran through my neighborhood, ran through my yard, in the town that I grew up in. And normally, outside of some deep parts where the water just kind of pools, it was always maybe 1.5 feet, 2 feet deep, probably about 40 feet wide. Not a small creek, but not a big creek either. And the water level crested at, I want to say, 11.5 feet. So that's how much water we got in about, I want to say, 2.5 hours. And it got me to thinking about a time when I was a kid. A friend of mine, two friends of mine, we decided to go to this place called Dead Man's Cave. There's a separate creek in my town that runs right underneath the village. And it's a very large kind of, I don't know the best way to say it, but like half of a pipe or whatever. But I mean, it's probably 15 feet high. And anyway, this little creek runs all the way through town and then spills out into the other creek that I just mentioned that was unbelievably flooded. And I can't even imagine what this little creek was doing while the other creek was raging. But in the middle of that, what dumps into that is a storm sewer that runs up the main drag of the town that I grew up in. So all the runoff water from storms goes right into this. All the street parking lots, whatever it is. Anyway, we decided to go walking through there. And why, I don't know. We're fucking idiot kids. So we decided to just cruise through there. And I got to describe this. I mean, this is a storm sewer pipe. So it's probably, I don't know, 3.5 feet high, maybe 4 at the most. So you're hunched over, and we're walking to see how far up Central Ave we can get, and then pop out, of a manhole and probably scare the shit out of a bunch of people driving up the street, or come out in some parking lot or whatever. Well, while we were down there cruising along, hunched over, running along, we didn't realize that a thunderstorm had broke out. So now all of this water is starting to dump into this storm sewer. And we noticed that the water is getting higher. And it's getting higher at our feet at an alarming rate. And we're like, this is not good. So we get to one of the manholes. We send somebody up. And it was in a parking lot, so it was one of those grates. It wasn't like an actual manhole. And he says, oh my God, it's raining like hell up here. And we're like, all right, we got to get out of here. And we're probably, oh gosh, at least a good half mile back to the bigger tunnel where we can get out and we know we're going to be safe. So we start doing that, and as we're going, the water is just getting higher and higher and higher. And we get to the last of the manholes that we're aware of, or the last of the grates that we're aware of, that we could pop out before we get to the bigger tunnel. Because, I mean, the water is coming up. It's already up to our chests as we're hunched over. And we send one guy up, and some guy had parked his car on top of the grate. So there's no way we can get out there. We've got probably another 150, 200 yards to muscle through. He comes down. Our flashlights are starting to get wet, and I mean, this is just starting to become a living nightmare because we're almost close to drowning. And anyway, to make a long story short, we get out just in time. We all fall into the other creek, and we get to the other side. We turn back, and we see that the entire pipe is just blasting out water. I mean, there's no more air. There's no more room. I literally believe we were probably about 20 to 30 seconds away from being completely fucked and drowning. And anyway, we get home and clean up and all that kind of stuff and laugh. So I don't know. I guess that was probably the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, JJ. And it's all because of myself and just being a stupid idiot kid thinking that it'd be fun to go through that. I think the funny thing is that some people called that Dead Man's Cave, but the truth is there's different cave that goes under a cemetery in the town that I grew up in. That's actually the real Dead Man's Cave. But whenever I tell people that I'm familiar with around here, I say, hey, it's the bigger Dead Man's Cave. But so I hope that answers your question. That's probably the scariest thing that ever happened to me. That's probably the closest I've ever come to death. And I hope, my kids, that if I have kids and my friends who have kids, don't ever think of doing stupid shit like that and just play baseball or with Legos or whatever. I mean, I played in the fucking sewer, so that tells you a lot about me. Anyway, I think that's the last of the ones that I picked, so I'm going to save the other ones for another time. I hope this was a little bit of fun for you guys or a complete waste of time. Either way, I just am trying to bring you something because I know I'm stiffing you on a little bit of content. And again, I'm going to sign off here. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. Check out my Patreon page. I'm going to change the way the levels are there. And again, please check out my radio show, The Edge of the Unknown, and check out theedgeoftheunknown.com. And for those of you who have asked about seeing a picture of me, if you go to theedgeoftheunknown.com, there is a picture of moi, and you can see what I actually look like there. So having said that, I'm going to shut up, sign off, and tell you that Volume 18 will be coming up shortly, and much more to come after that. And again, theedgeoftheunknown.com, Sunday nights, 8 to 10 Eastern Time. It's live, but the archives will be up. You want to get involved, just go to theedgeoftheunknown.com and find out how you can interact with me live. You can call in. You've got questions for the guests. We're going to be talking all kinds of cool stuff. Deputy editor of Skeptical Inquirer, Ben Radford, is going to be on coming up soon. Algonquin healer and elder Michael Bastine, good friend of mine, is going to be coming on to talk about Native American heritage and folklore and wisdom. And we're also going to be talking about mediumship with Pete Standish. So lots of cool folks. And we're going to be doing some UFO and Sasquatch things as far as that goes farther into the month of August and early September. So everybody, I appreciate you listening. I hope this was a little bit of fun. It's a little bit different. I promise not to do this to you too much. But with this stuff that I just went through, holy God, this has been a trip and a half. So until next time, remember, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.